Hello everybody. We are joined by Mags Hall, green activist and parliamentary researcher, which we're very excited for. Obviously today we're making tandoori, cauliflower and dal. So I suppose we can get started with that while you tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and that would be great. And for a kind of biased thing here, you are a graduate of the University of Glasgow, so we are especially happy to have you.
I am. Yes, I am. I went to Glasgow Uni 2003 to 2000. I graduated in 2007. Thank you so much for having me along. It's really nice to be speaking to a bunch of people, do something different on a Thursday night. As you said in the introduction, I'm an activist with the Greens. I am a candidate for the upcoming elections in Mid-Scotland and Fife. And I'm the co-convener of the Scottish Green Party Council. And yeah, my day job is working in the Scottish Parliament with the Green MSPs. And one of the many things I do is specialise in food and agriculture policy. If you want to know a bit about what I did before politics, so my background was in food sovereignty activism and community work around food and access to land and food growing and community gardens. And I got involved in politics I initially got involved as a volunteer around about the independence referendum, but then I kind of seriously got involved at the last Florida elections. Worked on the campaign for that. Managed to get Mark Driscoll elected in Mid-Scotland and Fife, and then have been working in Parliament ever since. I loved the community activism side of things, but I think that the power of grassroots movements is huge. But whilst working particularly in low-income communities, so we did some projects. I did a project called Edible Estates in Magdalen in Edinburgh, and I also worked in a project in Kirkcaldy that was in a low-income community as well. We're constantly coming up with the huge barriers that are caused by inequality. So inequality around income, but also inequalities around access to land, inequalities around access to food itself, where people can get their food from, the choices that people are able to make being extremely limited by their circumstances. So it was a real eye-opener for me. And what I found was that there were lots and lots of people doing really amazing stuff, grassroots on the ground, but there were very few people talking about this at a higher up level where we desperately needed policy change. You know, becoming more active in politics, it was very much around the fact that nobody really was talking about food justice in Scotland at that point, and the inequalities around food, which were really impacting on people's day-to-day lives, but also impacting on people's abilities to make choices around, or to kind of play their part in tackling climate change as well. So yeah. So that's how I ended up going kind of from taking a sidestep from community activism side of things to more formal politics.
So it's really interesting to think kind of the perspective that actually a lot of the time to make real change, like you kind of need that push from above as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You need it at all levels. That's the thing. Around all things, but particularly around about food. You know, if you're going to make a difference to what people eat and how our diet impacts the planet and stuff, for far too long, it's been presented as a personal choice, and that we could all make decisions. And it absolutely, you know, we all have power in our pound. You know, we have power to make decisions every time we shop. But there are so many people that don't have that power, and so they need people speaking up for them as well. And also, we need structural change. Like there's such structural barriers within our food system that builds inequality into it. So grassroots activism is only going to get so far in that.
Okay, so it's a really big issue. My temptation is to start digging down into some of those issues. But what I'm particularly interested in, as kind of we're mainly students here, we kind of focus a lot on individual choice, I would say. And that kind of seems to be the way in which we can make the biggest difference. It feels the most kind of accessible to us. So I guess what I'm really interested in chatting about is the wider, how that all kind of connects to kind of farming, agriculture, the sustainability in those areas, and the stuff that maybe is slightly more invisible to us because it kind of is a bit deeper than a choice that an individual can make. So I guess I've kind of in my little notes, I'm like looking at my note questions over that, I'm talking a bit about food sovereignty, which I think is really interesting because it kind of encompasses that full range from kind of farmer to consumer. So could you give a definition of food sovereignty? Would be helpful.
I can. So food sovereignty is a global movement, and it's the one that my politics and my food politics in general definitely identifies with the most. And it fundamentally, it's about putting control of the food system in the hands of producers, but also consumers as well. So particularly here in the UK, but globally, our food system is controlled very much by the middlemen. It's controlled by powerful distribution companies. It's controlled by supermarkets. It's controlled by people who create the seeds, even that. And the people who actually produce our food, so that the farmers, but also, you know, the cooks, the people working in hospitality, and the people who are on the other end buying it, spending their money for it, have very little control and very little say. And that's the case right across the world where you go. It looks different in different places. So food sovereignty was established as a movement of peasant farmers in the global south. But since then, it's become a global movement because of that that power inequality that exists right across the world, and actually realising that in addressing that there's a solidarity there between both producers and consumers in trying to wrestle back control. It really encapsulates the fact that justice and sustainability go hand in hand, and that you can't really tackle one without the other. Both on a social and environmental level.
That's interesting. It makes me think a lot about kind of, you know, like corporate sustainability, in terms of like most major supermarkets have their kind of sustainability policies, and they're pretty comprehensive and kind of convincing. Like even for me, if I like read up on like Tesco's website and what they say about sustainability, it's like, okay, yeah, they're doing a lot. But actually, when it is these big kind of bodies that own all the food production or are in control of it at least, it means that people are always going to be disadvantaged.
The issue with corporate social responsibility projects and corporate sustainability is, it all looks good on paper and it could all sound fine, but they are so far removed from what they're actually doing, and particularly with supermarkets. Supermarkets are not producing the food. You know, they're part of a system, and they have the power within that system. It's very easy for them to make commitments, but they're not the ones who are actually having to deliver on it. They're passing on the responsibility elsewhere to farmers and to food producers. It's not just a question of justice; it's a question of fundamental economic sustainability as well. So particularly in the UK, you know, food producers receive such a small proportion of the money that's spent on food, like annually by the public, and they're squeezed ever tighter and tighter into very difficult. You know, there's a huge issue in the UK with unfair contracts between supermarkets and food producers. Still, we should be holding our farmers to account for how they use the land, what they're producing and how they're producing it, and the environmental impact of that. But in exchange, we've got a responsibility to pay them fairly and to make sure that they can make a living out of this, which a lot of the time they can't at the moment. We have constructed a food system that is so dominated by the supermarkets and by, you know, big corporations that farmers have nowhere else to go. But it doesn't have to be that way, because it's food policy and it's politics, political strategy and political ideology that has got us to this point in the first place. But we can also use policy to bring much more fairness and diversity into the food system as well. And there's loads of strategies that we could be pursuing to kind of break the dominance of supermarkets and multinational food corporations. But at the moment, we're choosing not to do that.
Are there any easily digestible of those things that we can talk about? Like in terms of, I'm sure it's a huge issue that is hard to tackle, but like how can we start to bring about those attitudes into our parliamentary policies?
So maybe it's best to start talking about what we're doing at the moment in Scotland to try and kind of set the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the answer is we're not doing anything. It's quite an easy answer. Up until now, this current Scottish government, certainly since the last election in 2016, has an extremely laissez-faire attitude when it comes to the food system. It is market-driven. It's business as usual, and they've been. It's don't rock the boat. Everything is fine. We're not going to accept that there's any kind of issues. Environmental stuff, we can tack that on at the sides with a few incentives here and there, a few tweaks to the agricultural payment scheme. It'll all be fine. And in a large part, they've been allowed to get away with that because of Brexit, I would say. Brexit has introduced so much uncertainty, particularly into farmers. they've spent the entire Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government, I should say, spent the last 5 years saying, oh, but Brexit's really difficult, so we can't change anything at the moment, we just have to wait and see what happens. But it's very much a cover for the strategy that they're going down, which is leave it to the market and it'll all be okay. So yeah, up until now, our agricultural policy has been entirely driven by the EU. But there are lots of parts of food policy that aren't driven by the EU. So things like read about food policy to do with health, food that we use in schools, food that we use for public procurement, all that kind of thing. We've always been able, it's always been devolved. We've always been able to do that, our own kind of thing on it. And we've just not taken up that opportunity. Everything has been around, don't rock the boat. It's too, it's now's not the time to do it. We'll do it in the future, which as an activist is incredibly frustrating, because particularly around about climate change, we know that we can't sit on our hands and say, oh well, we'll see how Brexit goes. Like 10 years time, we might start doing something around climate and agriculture, because it's too late to do that. So it's been quite a frustrating time to be in Parliament, but at the same time, there's been I would say there's been broad agreement that the lack of progress has been incredibly poor and incredibly frustrating. It's going to be an interesting election. I think people will be talking around food from a climate perspective, because we're going into this election with a much greater public awareness about climate issues, but also from a social justice point of view as well. The pandemic's made people really sit up and notice just how much inequality there is in Scotland still, and how that manifests itself in terms of food. We need a recognition right across government that food is a priority, it's important, but it's also a way of delivering change, it's a way of delivering better health impacts, it's a way of delivering climate change reductions, it's a way of reducing social inequalities as well, and seeing that as a priority that they should be delivering on.
I'd just like to acknowledge the impact of Brexit on Scottish farmers. So I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit. And so if most of our kind of if all of our agricultural policy was coming from the EU, where does that kind of place us now?
Yeah, so what we did, so from a legislation point of view, the Parliament, I wouldn't say chose, they didn't really have a choice. The Scottish Government's approach was to copy and paste our existing agricultural policy. So pretty much all the legislation has been copied and pasted over. For some stuff, that's fine. So for things like food standards, we think it's important that we just maintain food standards with the EU, because the EU already has some of the highest food standards in the world. If we're going to continue trading with them, we need to maintain that. So that's all fine. But when it comes to agriculture, so the Common Agricultural Policy, which we were part of, it gets reviewed every 6 or 7 years or so. So we've copied and pasted the version of the Common Agricultural Policy, which we were working under until we left. And there's a new version coming in at the end of this year, which is quite different and has much stronger environmental focus. And so basically we're now stuck with a policy that's out of date, which the rest of Europe has rejected. So the principle of subsidies is sound, and it's something that is actually in line with food sovereignty principles, which is that food is not a normal commodity, it's a public good and it's a resource that we all need. And so it's within the collective good, the collective society, it's within our interest to make sure that we have enough food and that it's affordable. The problem is they become so distorted over time that they're no longer linked to that core principle of delivering public goods. They've become about controlling the market and around maintaining dominance of particular sectors. So when we talk about agricultural subsidies, actually should point out that they are by no means distributed fairly. There are certain sectors get a lot more. So the lamb and beef sector gets the bulk of direct payments in Scotland. Despite that being the exact food that from a health and environmental point of view, we should be eating a lot less of, yet they still get lots of money. We've lost that link between demand and supply, but also between what it is we're actually want to achieve from spending our public money. And that's due to a number of historical factors, but it's also in part due to the influence of those particular sectors in Scotland. So from a numbers point of view, if you're looking at how many farmers we have in Scotland and what they produce, we have a lot more beef and sheep farmers than we have fruit and veg farmers. Sometimes, food campaigners blame the European Union for that and say, oh, but that's the common agricultural policy, it's set up that way. It absolutely doesn't have to be that way at all. So there's actually quite a lot of flexibility within the common agricultural policy. We, and when I say we, initially I'm talking about the UK, because for a long time within the EU, these things were devolved, but they were still relatively controlled from the UK. But certainly the last 20 years of the Scottish Parliament, we've had full devolution. We've had the ability to make these changes, and we've chosen to not do that.
Where does that leave us on an independence perspective, right? If Scotland has had these powers and has chosen not to use them, for whatever reason, like, firstly, what would you say the reason for that is? And would that change after independence, do you think?
The short answer is not automatically, no. So as a Green, I support independence, our party supports independence, but we support independence because of the possibilities of what we can do after independence. And we talk about independence in the context of the changes that we'd want to make and how we can make it fairer. And they are by no means automatic. As I said, there are some things, there are some areas where you can genuinely say, we've not been able to make a change because we've not had the powers in Parliament. But there's lots of other stuff that will only change if there's political will. Independence is not a panacea, but I would hope that firstly, we'd end up with a wider range of voices in Parliament. We'd stop, our Parliament is, this is funny saying this as an independence supporter because the unionists will say this as well, but our Parliament is completely dominated and hamstrung at the moment by the constitutional debate. It's very difficult to get things done. It's difficult to build cross-party support because it continues to fall along constitutional lines. It's hard to make any progress. So independence would take that away. It would remove a lot of excuses. And I would hope it would open up space within Parliament for a broader range of voices on issues. And I would hope that there would be more progressive voices in Parliament on that as well.
So my other question was, in terms of the majority, kind of by number, of farmers in Scotland being lamb and beef farmers, if I got that right, what does that mean in terms of if those things are the worst for the environment and kind of, I guess, as kind of sustainable food systems are moving in a direction of making things more locally produced, but we would want to move away from those kind of high carbon foods, kind of what sort of farming system can we envision that is like sustainable in Scotland?
Yeah, so the interesting thing, so meat definitely has a higher, it is a high carbon food, but it is possible to produce it in a much more sustainable way. There are lots of different ways that you can calculate environmental emissions from food. And it's not straightforward, in particular because meat does not actually produce carbon. Well, certain elements of meat production produces carbon, but actually, when we're talking about meat, it's methane and ammonia are kind of the two big climate change gases that they produce. And they are treated in a different way in the environment. It's the intensification of animal farming that's the climate issue. But because it's complicated, it makes it very easy for the industry to turn around and say, oh, well, we've been misrepresented. Actually, Scottish meat is fine and it's not an environmental problem. And the majority of Scottish meat, the way it's produced, is. So there's this kind of question going on around, do we work towards creating better animal agriculture systems? Or do we say that that's not possible given our current population and the diets that people are choosing, and we explore alternatives instead? And I would say that there's no right or wrong to that. I would say that's two different approaches to take, and that they're both right. As long as you're looking to reduce your environmental impact, that's great. When you talk about foods, like you're always just one or two steps talking about away from talking about wider political choices as well, because it is, we all eat and we all make decisions every single day, but also because of that, so many other decisions around around decisions around how much we pay people, decisions around the benefit system, they have a knock-on effect on the food system and on the food that we eat as well. So it's very difficult. I would say anyone who's suggesting quick fix policies or quick fix ideas, any issues in the food system, don't trust them because it's not going to be an answer. It's going to be a stick and plaster over the top. because these things run so much deeper.
After the next Scottish Parliament election, like what would you like to see happen?
Policy takes time to develop, so we desperately need to start developing a new agricultural support scheme, and one that puts public goods at the heart of it. So reprofiles money towards producing the things that we should be eating more of, like fruit and veg, and directing money away from things like meat, which we know we should be eating less of. And also supporting farmers to make the changes that need to be done in the industry as well. Farm training schemes, farm advisory services, so that they are adopting climate-friendly practices, they're diversifying if needs be, they're switching the kind of food that they produce, shifting away from animal agriculture towards other land uses, that kind of stuff.
I have a final question, and then I'll let you go and enjoy your dinner. Which is, okay, so we've spoken all about food policy and politics and all of that good stuff. For the people who are here tonight or will be watching this recording afterwards, what do you have any advice or routes for students to kind of try and make a difference in the food systems we have? What do you think is the direction people should be taking?
So I would say, so from a food sovereignty point of view, I would say get involved with a local project. And again, talking about breaking down barriers and meeting different people and stuff like that. There's some, it's been a while since I've lived in Glasgow or done any work in Glasgow, but I'm pretty sure there's still some excellent local projects in Glasgow that people can be getting involved in, around different community gardens that you can go and spend some time growing food. And yeah, community garden projects also have cooking projects alongside that, so you can learn some skills, meet other people, and sit down and cook and eat together. And if you can meet people from different backgrounds to you whilst you're doing that, then all the better. I'd also say look around at where you're spending your money and try and support local businesses, and particularly local businesses that have an ethical stance. If you're near a locavore, well done you. I love Locavore. They've done a fantastic amount of work. I first went to Locavore when it was just Reuben in one shop on the south side. You got your local tomatoes. Excellent, yeah. Go along. I think there's still a tech and community interest company as well, so they're often looking for people to be like voluntary board members for them, that kind of thing. If you want them to get more involved in how systems work, people like them are great to be part of. If you want to read up, in the UK, there's an organisation called the Land Workers Alliance, which is mostly based down in England, but they do really good stuff around food sovereignty. Globally, there's an organisation called La Via Campesina, which is the peasants' rights movement, which is kind of like the guiding body of the food sovereignty movement. They are good ones to look up as well. So yeah, just go out, get involved, ask lots of questions. I think, especially when it comes to sustainability, there's no right and well, there are right and wrong ways to do it. There's no perfect way to do it. Is the thing. Trying to be a bit better and to eat a bit better, and particularly, I really want to ram home that environmental action is nothing without social justice as well. So it's all, think about not just how your food is produced, but who you're buying your food from, whether they're making a living from that. And if there's a way that you can ensure that more of your money goes directly to farmers who are growing in a sustainable way locally, then you're doing an amazing job.
Okay, great. Lots of different avenues there as well. So do one or all of those things if you're interested. In which case, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight, but especially thank you to Mags for offering your expertise on a wide range of issues. It was really interesting. Yeah, I'm excited to rewatch this while I edit it and absorb it for a second time when I'm not trying to cook lentils simultaneously.
No, I forgot how much lentils boil over. I'm like, I'm trying to talk and stop. My oven is such a mess. I'm going to have to really scrub it now. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, though, I'm always happy to chat on Twitter. I think I'm at Mags SGP. Yes, I am. SGP for Scottish Green Party. Yeah, give me a shout out on Twitter. I talk about lots of politics stuff, but also lots of food stuff as well. I still try and post lots of interesting food content there, talking about food politics and stuff. So give me a follow and drop me a message something.
I feel like I can't emphasize it enough. I just want to say it again. Thank you so much for joining.
That's okay.
Thank you.
It's fun. Thanks, guys.
Okay, and everyone's hungry, so everyone got to go. Okay, sweet. Well, thank you so much, Mags. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy your time, cauliflower.
Bye.